At first, no one understood why a single man like Jonathan Reed would walk into a quiet children's shelter on a rainy Thursday evening and walk out holding the hand of a little girl who couldn't speak a single word. But Jonathan knew something the world didn't. He knew the moment her eyes lifted to meet his, everything in both their lives was about to change forever. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why millions of people online say this was one of the most beautiful acts of kindness they've ever witnessed. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments. Jonathan had never planned on adopting. He was 38, a high school art teacher, the kind of man who spent weekends fixing old bicycles or repainting community murals. He lived quietly, alone, but not lonely, always believing life would show him when to turn the next page. But when the shelter called looking for volunteers to help with weekend creative workshops, he signed up without a second thought, unaware that his entire future was waiting in a small chair in the corner of a yellow classroom. Her name was Alana, 6 years old, big searching eyes, tiny hands that trembled whenever someone stood too close. She never spoke. Not a sound, not even a whisper. The staff explained that her trauma ran deep, the kind that steals a child's voice long before it steals anything else. Jonathan didn't know the details, and he didn't ask. What mattered was that when he placed a paintbrush near her hand, she touched it like it was something alive, something important. From that moment, the two of them settled into a strange, beautiful rhythm. While the other kids laughed and splattered paint across the tabletops, Alana worked silently, creating sweeping colors and shapes that surprised even Jonathan. She'd look at him after every brush stroke, almost asking for permission to believe she'd done something right. And each time, Jonathan smiled, nodding with a warmth she had forgotten existed. Over the next weeks, something in Jonathan began to ache whenever he left the shelter. He'd sit in his car gripping the steering wheel, wondering why a child he barely knew felt like someone he had been missing his whole life. He tried to ignore it at first, telling himself he was simply protective, simply invested in her growth. But deep down, he understood what was really happening. Something inside him had already said yes. Then came the day that changed everything. A new family had come to meet potential adoptive children. A couple with polite smiles, expensive shoes, and voices that echoed down the hallway. Staff members guided them straight to the art room, pointing out the children who were good fits, adaptable, cheerful, talkative. Jonathan watched as they glanced at Alana but quickly moved on, uninterested in a girl who rarely looked up and never spoke. But the moment they walked away, Alana's eyes darted to Jonathan with a fear so sharp it nearly brought him to his knees. That was when he knew. He couldn't leave her in a world that kept choosing to walk past her. Within 3 months, after paperwork and interviews and nights filled with both excitement and fear, Jonathan walked into the shelter again. But this time he didn't arrive as a volunteer. He arrived as a father. When he told Alana she was coming home with him, she didn't speak, of course. But she stepped forward, wrapped her thin arms around his waist, and held on with a strength that told him everything she couldn't say. Life at home was gentle, slow, and filled with small victories. The first time she sat at the dining table instead of the corner. The first time she reached for his hand without hesitation. The first time she laughed silently, shoulders shaking, mouth wide open, but no sound coming out. Jonathan treasured these moments like gold. But challenges came too. Nights when she woke up crying but couldn't explain why. Days she refused to eat. Mornings when she sat by the window staring at nothing, slipping back into the world she came from. And through all of it, Jonathan stayed close. He didn't push. He didn't demand. He simply stayed, steady as sunlight through an open curtain. One evening, about a year after she moved in, Jonathan found her sitting on the living room floor surrounded by sheets of paper. She had drawn something new, an image of a man holding a small girl's hand. Underneath it, scribbled in careful strokes, were the words, "Thank you." It was the first time she had written anything since coming home. Jonathan felt his breath catch, and for a moment he had to close his eyes. She was speaking to him in the only language she trusted. Time passed. Years rolled by. Alana grew into a teenager with a quiet strength, a brilliant mind, and a talent for art that whispered through every stroke. Still, she did not speak, though doctors insisted she physically could. But speech, they explained, is not only the work of lungs and tongue and throat, it is the work of memory, and hers had not yet healed. By the time she turned 15, Jonathan had accepted that maybe she would never talk, and he was at peace with it. Her silence had never bothered him. In fact, it taught him how to truly listen. Then came the night everything changed again. Alana had been working for months on a school project, an art portfolio reflecting personal identity. She never let Jonathan see it, though she worked at the dining table every evening. One Saturday, she approached him with a trembling paper in hand and motioned for him to follow her to the living room. Confused but curious, he sat on the couch while she connected her tablet to the TV. A video began to play, as images of her drawings filled the screen, dark sketches of her past, bright paintings of her present, and hopeful shapes of her future. Jonathan realized this wasn't just a project. This was her life story, her voice, her truth. And at the very end, when the screen faded to black, a soft sound slipped into the room. A whisper, barely a breath. "Dad!" Jonathan froze. He blinked, unsure if his ears were playing tricks on him. But then she said it again, louder, steadier, overflowing with emotion that had been locked away for a decade. "Dad!" He didn't rush to her. He didn't smother her with his arms. Instead, he knelt slowly in front of her, letting his tears fall freely. Alana touched his face gently, searching his eyes for approval, for reassurance, for anything that told her she hadn't made a mistake. "You did it," Jonathan whispered. "You found your voice." But she shook her head, wiped her tears, and pointed to him. "You found it for me," she said. It was the first full sentence she had spoken since she was a toddler. Jonathan held her then, not as a frightened child, but as a young woman stepping boldly into the person she was always meant to be. They stayed like that for what felt like hours, wrapped in gratitude, wrapped in love, wrapped in something bigger than both of them, something that couldn't be explained, only felt. Word of her transformation spread through her school first. Teachers cried, students cheered. The counselor hugged her so tightly she squeaked. But the story didn't stay in that building long. When Alana submitted her video to a youth arts competition, she added a caption that read, "To the man who taught me that silence is not weakness. Thank you for loving me until I learned to love myself." The video went viral within days. Millions watched her journey. The silent child, the patient father, the drawings that carried years of pain and hope, and the moment she spoke her first word in 9 years. Viewers from around the world wrote messages of praise, support, and awe. They called Jonathan a hero. They called Alana an inspiration. But she kept insisting the truth was simpler. Love was the hero. She was just the student. As she stepped onto the stage to receive a National Youth Arts Award, Jonathan stood in the front row, hands clasped, eyes shining. She looked out at the audience, then down at him, and something inside her knew exactly what she wanted to say. The microphone trembled in her hand, but her voice did not. "My dad taught me that healing doesn't always start with words," she said. "Sometimes it starts with someone choosing you when the world doesn't. This award belongs to him as much as it does to me." The crowd erupted. Cameras flashed. Jonathan wiped his eyes again, laughing at himself for crying so much lately, but he didn't care. Every tear was worth it. Years later, when Alana became a licensed art therapist specializing in trauma recovery, she opened her own clinic. The sign on the door read, "Quiet Light Studio." On the wall inside hung her very first drawing from the shelter, the one painted with trembling hands and a hopeful heart. Next to it, framed neatly, were the words, "Thank you." Jonathan visited often, always welcomed, always proud. She repaid him not with gifts, not with success, but by becoming the kind of person he had always believed she could be. Kind, compassionate, strong, a light for others still lost in the dark. And that, more than anything, stunned the internet. Not because she finally spoke, not because her story went viral, but because a man who had no obligation to love her chose to anyway, and because a little girl who had every reason to give up chose to rise. Together, they built a life that proved something the world often forgets. Family is not always written in blood. Sometimes it's written in courage, in patience, in gentle hands holding trembling ones, in years of quiet understanding, and in the moment, a single whispered word says everything that was ever needed. Dad, thank you. Before you go, if this story touched your heart, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. This is Heartland Kindness, where every story reminds us that love can change the world. See you in the next one.